Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 13.
13?
Episode 13. 13 episodes of glory.
Yes.
Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, as promised, a move away from the blockbuster realm and into world cinema for the first time.
Yeah, excited about this one.
Yes. We saw the film together. The film, of course, being The Beasts.
Yeah.
Quite an experience, wasn't it, actually?
Yeah.
I know it's sort of a bit of a trite and perhaps naff way to open things off, but I think it really was.
Yeah, it was, I won't give too much away, but tension was palpable in that auditorium.
Yes, it was palpitation-inducing, for sure.
Definitely.
As the crux of the film is about sort of a culture divide or an ideological divide within a cultural divide.
Yeah.
I thought we'd kick off this week's episode with a discussion around films that tackle similar themes and ideas. Yeah. The discussion will take us through a menagerie of films across many eras. And then, of course, leading to the film itself. We were sort of saying before, it's probably the first time in a while, and I'm not sure if this is sort of like a detriment to the films we've discussed more recently, but where we'll actually have a good chunk of the podcast reserved for the actual film.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. It's been quite tricky to, especially with last week's film, it's been really tricky to like think of much at all to say about them.
Yeah.
That's not to kind of devalue that the work of the people that made it, but it's a lot easier to sort of sink your teeth into asbestos, as it's called in Spain.
Very nice.
I've done my research again.
You have. He's done it.
Such as Spanish for the beasts.
Right then, I see no reason why we shouldn't just get straight into it.
Nice.
Questing the cinematic void.
So in an effort to sort of preface the film with the usual thematic discourse you're used to on Cineboys to Cinemen, we thought it would be good to sort of kick off the discussion with a good old natter about films that explore the clashing of different cultures, as that is one of the central themes.
Yeah.
There are so many themes in The Beast that are handled really, really well.
Yeah.
So we tried to sort of pick a few films that in some ways will sort of reflect some of the conflict within it.
Yeah.
And also films that have their own legacy with their own sort of when wrestling with similar issues.
Yeah.
I'll let you start.
Oh, all right then. What do I start on? I think I'm going to start by discussing Straw Dogs.
Straw Dogs.
I think
He's going in big.
Yeah, I was going to say Bait. I do want to talk about Bait, but Bait is, well, different in a lot of ways, but also similar in its setting.
Yeah. It's strange. I still find that strange about the strange thing about Straw Dogs.
Yeah, it's really odd. I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while since I've seen it, but the main kind of culture clash is not necessarily a nationality, although obviously he's American, isn't he? The main character is from the States. But more of a sort of lifestyle clash. Would you say that's fair?
I think so. I was thinking quite a lot about Straw Dogs because a few of the sort of reviews that I read about the Beasts sort of directly address the similarities in lots of ways. And I think one of the key ways of the similarities is, you're right, in that lifestyle difference, chiefly in, the sense that Dustin Hoffman's character in Straw Dogs is like very academic.
Yes, yeah.
Very sort of aware of the sort of socio-cultural changes that are going through in the world, and that sort of directly impacts his own behaviour and the way he deals with confrontation and difficult situations. And that's sort of set against this isolated Cornish town. It doesn't do Cornish people any favours, this film, necessarily.
No, it doesn't. Doesn't portray them that accurately, I would say.
No. I think the film sort of relies on the idea, perhaps the sort of falsely attributed idea, that in these rural, distant communities, there perhaps isn't that access, the same levels of access to that, to high quality education, or that sort of socio-cultural awareness of what's going on around you, or indeed the will or desire to want to do those things, which is something that's explored in The Beasts as well.
Yeah, completely.
We're going to keep saying that a lot. It's like in The Beasts.
But
obviously that's there's a lot of area for critique and discussion in that, because that's not necessarily always a fair depiction of that sort of lifestyle. But for the sake of discussing the film, I think that's how Peckinpah sets that battle up between the culturally informed, academically aware individual from a distant land coming to a place that's, you know, traditional values, and with those traditional values, ideas about, you know, male-centered, patriarchal environment.
Yeah.
And how about those things slowly sort of, you know, grind on each other, and then obviously descends into full-bore horror.
Yeah. Some difficult scenes at the end of that film. Yeah, I always thought like the relationship with his wife was always interesting as well. Like I always got the impression that she'd sort of married his intellect, and then simultaneously sort of started to resent that decision that she had made. And also, like, is it her friends at the beginning are like quite baffled by the fact that she's gone off with this fella?
Yeah.
And there's another kind of divide there, isn't there? That they feel a little bit like confronted by the fact that she's sort of chosen someone clearly massively outside their realm of people.
Yeah, their frame of reference. Yeah, absolutely.
And then, so that sets up the kind of theme of a division of ideology that then only gets worse as the film kind of, not worse per se, but like, it kind of explores it a lot deeper. Yeah, I need to rewatch Straw Dogs. I remember it being quite a grind. But
it is. I mean, I think Peckinpah's films tend to be. I mean, there's a couple, perhaps, aside from The Ballad of Cable Hogue, which I think is the only sort of Peckinpah film that, from the top of my head, that isn't explicitly violent. Violence is his bread and butter. It's how he communicates the themes and ideas in his films. Yeah, I think in Straw Dogs, absolutely takes centre stage here. Violence as an idea of being like a necessity. To mankind. It's this residual desire within that in the right circumstances will unleash itself, and it's almost like primal urge to prove yourself through violence.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you know, and I think that's always going to be one of the more troubling aspects of the film, because obviously there's going to be different readings of that depending on your stance, I guess, on the sort of psychological studies around violence and it's how, you know, essential a part it is to the human condition. But it's something that Peckinpah is very, very good at handling. I mean, irrespective of how you feel about it. I mean, if you think about something like The Wild Bunch, his Western, you know, he uses violence to sort of almost directly challenge the Hollywood idea of what the West was. You know, he has characters that are horrible, that you know, do horrible things, and the violence is really unflinching for the time. And that's to sort of unmask the great illusion that I think many people had about the Wild West being this place of discovery and fixed moral sort of parameters. And you know, I think he's really good for it. I mean, his background is of someone who was known being quite quiet and reserved, but had bouts of rage himself. He was not. He could be a very prickly fella.
He's quite a troubled guy. Definitely.
Yeah, he really was. Yeah,
just even on the set of this film as well. I think. Yeah, he previously been kind of called out for his behaviour on the previous film he made, so he had to go to England apparently, and that was why he ended up making Straw Dogs, was because of like sort of even back then, like he developed a bit of a reputation for being quite reckless and having like issues with surrounding sort of alcoholism and stuff like that. So,
I mean, I know he served in the Second World War in the Japanese theatre of the conflict.
Oh right,
so I think that sculpted a lot of his not only some of the attitudes towards violence in his films, but also perhaps the issues that dogged him his whole life. But I like Straw Dogs. I think it's I mean, it's not enjoyable.
No,
and obviously the sexual assault scene is drawn a lot of fierce debate, and in the way it's depicted, and the way particularly that Dustin Hoffman's character's wife responds initially to the start of it. Yeah, you know, I wouldn't begrudge anyone for having a very strong and negative view of that, but I feel that Peckinpah is a little bit cleverer than I think people give him credit for in terms of the way he handles these themes and ideas. Despite his clear personal demons and despite his willingness to use violence so explicitly in his films, I just think there is a bit more going on with him than some of the criticism necessarily acknowledges. However, you know, with things like that, you have to expect people might not like it, and I completely understand and support that.
Of course, yeah, definitely.
But it's a really interesting film about that divide. About Dustin Hoffman's character comes into that world with the best intentions, but you know, he hasn't really thought about how his conduct and the way he behaves might actually rub people up the wrong way.
Yeah, no, that's true.
You know, you hear so many stories about people, you know, intellectuals or people that have like a broader understanding of the world, coming into these sort of rural spaces and trying to sort of instigate change, which is a huge theme in Beasts.
Yep, definitely. Yeah,
That's the third time I think I've said that. But it's people often don't really realise that actually that could be quite insulting and quite you're not just going to do away with hundreds of years of tradition and identity just by trying to use fact or reason. It's not always as straightforward as that, which I think the film handles that quite quietly, but it bubbles away underneath to the point then you get the violence, the aforementioned violence.
Yeah. I always think with both Straw Dogs and the Beasts, it handles the notion that it doesn't matter how clever you are, you're not going to necessarily understand people.
No.
And especially people from a different cultural background. That doesn't grant you the right to sort of be or act superior and act almost like an invading army with your kind of bold new strategy that you think is going to change everything. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the way that they respond to him isn't very nice either. I don't think it justifies the resulting behaviour by any stretch of the imagination. No. Even when it starts off as jibing and bullying a little bit, doesn't it? And, and his resistance to that is perhaps built over, his own sort of anxieties and spinelessness, and it really explores that residual horror within. It's definitely worth a go, but it's not an enjoyable film to watch necessarily.
Yeah,
I think we should stay in Cornwall actually, since we're already here. It's obviously a place that for both of us we have a lot of reverence for, having studied there. It not crossed my mind at all to mention bait, but it makes perfect sense around this topic. So go for it.
Completely, yeah. I think where bait is interesting in the context of this discussion is the fact that it's sort of swaps round. So it's more from the perspective of the existing inhabitants of a certain place, again like a Cornish fishing village in this case, and it's not coming from the outsider's perspective. It's from the locals' perspective. I mean, it does offer both opinions, definitely. The way it explores its themes is a lot more exploring existing traditions and not taking into account the progression as necessarily something you should get behind. Whereas I think with the Beasts, definitely it kind of you are sort of on his side. I feel like because you spent he's the main character Antoine is you're sort of with him, but it's just flipped on its head with bait. Both sides of the coin are merited.
I think, I think you're right in sort of the way the film prioritises the Cornish perspective, in the sense that obviously Cornwall is a very desirable holiday destination in England, and I think that's something to be shared and enjoyed, but the point of the movie is that there are people that are monetising it who aren't necessarily a part of those communities.
Yes.
And that obviously has ramifications for those communities, because then the money doesn't circulate within the local area.
Yes.
So you're getting people from London who are coming, buying second homes. It's an issue that's covered quite extensively, in the news fairly recently, wasn't it? This idea about second home ownership and how it's obviously damaging local communities a great deal. And I think the release of Bait was quite timely within that context, because it's the idea that people should be able to come and enjoy these things, but what's the real cost of doing that? And how much is it impacting these communities that people want to come and see? They want to come and see these communities. They want to see the sort of fusty Cornish locals and the pubs and the seagulls and the boats coming into port. But they don't want it necessarily on anything other than their own terms. They want to view it from the sort of quiet warmth of their well-decorated converted cottage. You know what I mean? So it's... I've stayed in plenty of Airbnbs in that area, and you can understand. I think, and
I think you can. Yeah.
Well, part of the problem, obviously, but and I really think the film portrays that not battle, but that sort of
the conversion of villages into almost theme parks. I guess. Because it's almost like you say, you're sort of on a ride when you're just kind of passing by and gawping, or at least that's certainly how it's portrayed in Bait. Is that these sort of the outsiders are kind of gawping at it and kind of finding it fascinating without generating a local economy in any real way,
and alienating the people as well, making them feel that they can't. It deprives them of their agency and robs them of their heritage a little bit. If people are coming in buying up houses that people in these villages probably knew the owners of, it's like it must be a really difficult thing to navigate, particularly as if you are sort of half reliant on that that aspect to supplement your economy and keep you going.
Yeah.
The way the film handles it, I think you're right. I think the film is overtly supportive of the Cornish argument, but I think there is a perhaps more nuanced approach than.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it probably he's sort of more aware of that on the second watch. Maybe, I don't know. There's a mutual hostility. In the movie, which I think is really a really fascinating element of the movie. Whilst I am definitely more on the side of the locals in this particular instance, I think it must be really hard for them to sort of reconcile with the fact that these snooty Londoners, these sharp-nosed Londoners who turn up and just treat their community like you say, like a theme park. It must be hard for them to sort of stomach that. So, but I see where you're coming at.
It was just there was like a slight peppering of that idea in there that made it more interesting,
which is admirable. I think, particularly
definitely.
as the film is from a Cornishman.
Yeah,
so,
completely.
It's interesting that he considers that point of view. I'm going to move away from Cornwall now.
No,
we've got to.
We've not got enough petrol. We haven't got enough petrol to get away from Cornwall. Sorry.
We're going to America. Lulu Wang's film The Farewell.
Okay.
Now, I know you haven't seen it, but
no.
So the film is predominantly from an Asian American perspective. So it focuses on this divide between Eastern and Western culture, and how that divide is present within an individual that is obviously her family is from the East, but has obviously been around and fully adopted a large part of Western cultures and ideas and traditions around lots of different things. One of which being mortality, which ends up being the central theme of the film, as the lead character is told that basically the matriarch of the family, the Nan, the grandma, or affectionately known in Mandarin as Nai Nai, is ill.
Okay.
She has cancer, and she hasn't got that long to go.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
She, against her family's wishes, she goes over to China, and then she's confronted by this wholly different way of dealing with it, in the sense that all of her family tell her that her tests were fine, and she was absolutely fine.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So what happens to the character at that point is that she sort of wrestles with these two, conflicting approaches to how different cultures would deal with what is a really difficult and heartbreaking situation to deal with.
Okay. Yeah.
And as the film goes on, she has sort of debates and arguments with various members with her family. But there's one particular scene that really addresses that cultural divide, is when she, I think it's her uncle she speaks to. He sort of acknowledges that the approach that she's coming from is a Western view, which is more sort of individualistic.
Okay.
So, in Western culture, you probably would never see anyone lying to someone about their cancer diagnosis.
No, Christ,
because it's a more individual thing. It's like, you need to know this. Whereas in Eastern culture, it's a way of the whole family shouldering and dealing with the burden of losing someone really important to them.
Okay.
And the film presents both angles with real sensitivity. And it's sort of this understanding that, and she sort of blunders in as like, no, I'm going to. And there's many opportunities where you think she's going to tell her.
Right, yeah.
And it then sort of never transpires. I won't say too much, I don't want to ruin it, because I don't know if you have actually seen it, or indeed anyone listening hasn't seen it. I really recommend it, because it was a film that really snuck up on me in terms of that. And it wasn't because I had any preconception to think it wouldn't. It was just sometimes you sit in the cinema and you really aren't ready to be hit as hard as you end up being hitten. Hitten. As much as you end up being hit. Wow. But, this idea that it isn't healthy to go around the world assuming that your perspective and your worldview is the best way and the definitive way to deal with even the most complex and tricky situations.
Okay, yeah.
The idea that the Western perspective is the perspective is, of course, is bollocks, and the way the film explored that in a very sensitive manner had me thinking a lot about that and how I perceive other cultures and the things that they do, which I really wouldn't get or understand. But my frame of reference, everything I've been taught, everything I've learned is completely different. Of course, it doesn't demonise that Western perspective, because the film is about that experience, about being caught in the middle. So it's really sensitive and a really great film.
Oh man, I like that. Sounds fascinating. I do need to watch that. I mean, I love the idea that it explores a sort of cultural divide which doesn't get touched on a lot. Like usually it's things like customs and things like maybe even food and and societal attitudes towards each other and like based on intellect, but never is it about things like death and mortality and
family
things like that. That sounds brilliant. It for some reason reminded me of. It actually isn't a film, so we're going slightly off
Oh,
topic.
there you go.
Briefly, there's a bit in. Have you seen Dope Sick? It's like a sort of.
No, I
It's
haven't.
like a mini series. It's good. But there's a moment where basically this sort of big pharma company, struggling to sell the idea of painkillers in Germany. And they find, like, after really like grappling with this task for ages, they're finally told, just like, people in that part of the world just deal with pain. That's part of their culture. They're part of their culture to just deal with pain and not try and suppress it. Try and actually accept it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's bizarre to me, and yeah, there's quite a big theme in that show. Is that basically it's effectively morphine what they're selling under the guise of it's OxyContin,
Right,
but
okay.
it's an opiate. And it's doing really well in America, not doing so well in Europe, and they're struggling to see why that is. And it's apparently it's because in Europe, people, the attitudes towards pain is just different, and similar to what you were saying about the East and the West's attitude towards death and mortality and things like that. It's just popped into my head. Fascinating.
No, yeah, it's a great movie. I really recommend it. Yeah, Lulu Wang. I think she's working on a TV show at the moment.
Oh, cool.
So we'll see how she gets on with that. But
nice.
yeah, a great debut from her. I'm going to go sort of now. We're going to go back a few decades now. We're going to stay with a sort of American film, Deliverance.
Okay, yes, John Boorman. Great movie. Yeah.
I think we're sort of diving around lots of different films and ideas here.
Yeah, we're returning to the sort of violent territory.
Yeah. We've just gone from really sort of like, funny and sweet mediation on cultural difference to
Squeal Piggy.
Squeal Boy.
Yeah.
Squeal Piggy,
Yeah.
Another film that is about this sort of another kind of divide. A divide in the same country. The United States, obviously a huge, vast country, but the way the film portrays the difference between the civilized man, quotation marks, the person who lives in the cities with the big job, the high flyer, and the deep south, and how they perceive the deep south as something to be conquered. It's almost like they're going. It's like a sort of trial of masculinity for some, or even like an avenue of business for others. This sort of untouched, unmolested landscape. It's there are resources to be mined and things to be destroyed in the pursuit of whatever it is they're trying to find. I can't remember, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I think that's one of the fascinating elements of that film is the sort of environmental element and also the cultural element that is explicit in that film in terms of the inhabitants of the Deep South. These people that live this off-grid lifestyle and the people that come from a world far removed. Yeah,
man. What I think Deliverance does really well is captures that feeling you get when you're in an unfamiliar place and you're surrounded by something that you don't understand or you think you understand and find frightening. So a good example of that in another film is like a bit in American Werewolf in London when they go into that pub.
It's just reversed.
Yeah, it's the same feeling. You're just like, it's dread and that lack of true understanding of the people and the environment that surrounds you. It can be really frightening, and Deliverance does such a great job of just like nailing that and exploring how that can lead to a rational and troubling behaviour in its own way. Obviously, the film's presentation of, again, perhaps not the most fanciful portrayal of people from the Deep South. Although, there are only really two people from that who really make that portrayal difficult, and there's obviously within some bad eggs. It is another scene with sexual assault, another film from that era, another famous scene as well. Almost the important, like Straw Dogs, that the sequence of sexual assault almost dominated everything else completely. It's quite not that long a scene. I mean that and the banjo thing. The banjo scene's great though. That's so really good. I still sort of hum that at work without even realising. Oh, really? And people join in. It's really weird. It's from Deliverance. Who knew that part could have such a cultural impact? There you go. It also again touches on that idea of, I think it's perhaps more intentional and the characters are more knowing of it in this film, but that belittling of people from rural, isolated locations and
the assumption that they're sort of ill-educated, ill-informed, and malleable, easy to manipulate. Which, again, The Beast does tap into, I think, in a much more nuanced manner, and we'll get into that later. But yeah, another interesting film that does that, and it's, you know, it is a great movie, a great film about the East, you know, the South and North divide, the environmental element. Yeah, great film.
The civil dispute. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and well acted. And obviously, Boorman will give you great action sequences as well.
Yeah,
with the
the rapids.
The rapids.
That's great. Yeah,
it's great.
Shall we? It's a film you mentioned earlier, which I would not have considered at all in this realm. But I don't know if you wanted to briefly touch on Team America.
staying with America.
Yeah. Whilst we're here.
Yeah. It's funny. I don't know why it sort of popped up. I mean, I think we were sort of discussing films that explore the portrayal of culture.
Yeah.
From a Western perspective. And I think, weirdly, this Team America is quite good at that. I'm not saying that this film doesn't have its questionable elements.
Yeah.
But I think the way in which the film portrays, for example, the Middle East, North Korea, is a sort of comment on the way American or indeed Western culture portrays the Middle East or North Korea. It's that sort of framework of assumptions that helps to justify a lot of the more nefarious and dodgier stuff that the West has done in those areas.
Yeah, completely.
Or not just necessarily in the way of painting someone in a bad light, but actually military action and involvement, the act of war. You know, it almost helps to sort of soften the blow of an engagement thousands of miles away, you know, out of sight, out of mind. I just thought that was a really interesting point. I mean, and I think that's something that Trey Parker and Matt Stone are keenly aware of in the film.
Completely.
I don't think they're just doing that to mock people.
Yeah, it seems like a cheap laugh, doesn't it? At surface level, it seems like a really cheap laugh. But it's not at all. It's them being really reflexive. Or in terms of like the country that they grew up in and how Americans see the world. Based on never actually travelling. Yeah, and like something like only 20% of Americans have a passport apparently.
Wow. Okay.
Or that was the case a couple of 10 or 20 years ago. And so as a result, they've got quite a narrow view of the rest of the world, and they do a really great job of kind of mocking that attitude, right down to the bit at the beginning where it's Paris that the roads are paved with croissants. It's just stuff like that. It's just filled with that kind of stuff.
It is, and the way also that America view themselves as well. Yeah. I mean, it's perhaps more explicit and overt than the other themes in the movie, but you know, that ties into the intention of the film, and indeed, and you were saying earlier was a possible reasons to why the film didn't really do that well in America. Yeah,
it didn't get very warmly received. I think a lot of people struggled to understand it, or at least it's sort of deeper. I say deeper. It's a strange term to use in the context of Team America, but they struggled to understand that it was, satire.
Yeah.
And whereas the rest of the world did amazingly. Like it performed outstandingly well in the rest of the world.
I've not seen it for a very long time. I'd like to sort of watch it now in the modern time with a group of people and see how they would view that as well, because it'd be interesting to see how the relationship with that film would change over time. Because it feels as if, I mean, I wouldn't begrudge anyone for sort of maybe focusing on the way that those portrayals are done necessarily. But I mean, again, I'd just be interested to know what people thought.
Definitely, yeah.
So there you go. Just a few films that sort of deal with some kind of conflict or the representation of conflict, either be that cultural or ideological. Lots of films. I didn't think we'd be able to have a podcast where we talk about The Farewell,
Team America in the same context.
Deliverance. You know, it's so the boys of cinema, we like to throw curveballs and surprises in here. So moving on to The Beasts then. It was a film that, I mean, I really knew nothing about it, which I think it was the film's absolute benefit for me. Or my benefit as a audience member. As I said in the last episode, it was literally just a trailer that came up and I thought, ooh. That really stood out amongst the other films. Not, to lay into the other ones, but that one just really stood out. And it absolutely delivered on that for me in terms of hammering home really sort of prescient themes and ideas that dominate the world that we live in today. Ideological, intellectual, historical divide, cultural divides. And the film handles all of it largely brilliantly.
Yeah, completely.
And I just think with a film that's so with a narrative that's so deceptively simple, it manages to sort of thread all these ideas in. It sort of gives nuance to both sides of the argument.
Yeah.
Even if, spoilers, there is an act of violence which defines the film later on, but before that, you can sort of understand each and every person's sort of individual perspective, and
all behaviour is sort of justified. Every single piece of behaviour right up until the act is kind of justified. I mean, it's not nice,
no,
but it's not beyond the realms of what you would consider doing if you were in their position.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, so for context, for those who haven't seen it, if you haven't, I implore you to go and see it. I hope it'll be in a cinema near you.
Yeah.
It looks like to probably be a film that'll go on Mubi. So again, if you have Mubi, it'll be on there. But it's about a French couple, a well-educated couple. I think the Antoine, the husband, is a retired teacher.
Yeah, it was mentioned that he's had an education and he's kind of had a career in education as well.
So they've moved out to this rural part of Spain and have a farm, and they practice eco-friendly techniques. It's an eco-farm. They're essentially hippies, really, aren't they?
Like self-sufficient.
Yeah,
hippies,
they're not sort of explicit hippies and a sort of Trustafarian sort of hippie that lives in a van and does spoken word poetry. But they are people that they practice a lot of like you say, self-sustaining. So their practice is all about being sustainable. Their presence alone, being foreigners, creates discontent within the local community. It's a part of Spain that was famously a battleground for them and the French during the Napoleonic War.
Yes.
So there's this sort of, and that history has lingered. That animosity has lingered.
Yeah, completely.
So that sets up one of the conflicts in the film. And then there's this looming, I think it's like the looming construction, or the possible looming construction of
wind turbines
in the local community, which would give a lot of money to the or what the local community thinks a lot of money to them.
Yes.
And the only people that are signed, so everyone has to sign to agree, otherwise they can't do it. And the only people that are disagreeing are the eco warriors.
Yes.
Shall we say? So again, that said, seeds of discontent. And the film really sort of kicks off from there and slowly drip feeds these issues and these conflicts and these attitudes to a point where it becomes almost unbearable to watch. And it's not explicitly tense in the sense that the stakes are particularly high in the film. But it's just the stifling intensity in which the characters address each other, speak to each other, act with each other, knowing not just the grand sort of historical context, but the personal individual histories of each character really helps with that. Sorry, I really went off on one there. But...
No, mate, no, it was good. I feel like handled xenophobia quite well, and that was the kind of key for you as an audience member to follow the Antoine and not the brothers. Right, that was just like, okay, these guys. I mean, I'm not justifying that kind of language or behaviour at all, but they're at first they just seem like horrendous sort of bullies, right? And then, but what the film does is it gradually introduces their point of view slowly and subtly and not overbearingly to the point where you feel like you'd want to be on their side. But it does sort of bubble up to you at least understanding where they're coming from, not to justify the xenophobic attitudes, but definitely to understand where their animosity comes from.
Exactly. I think you're right. I think it explores the apparatus of xenophobia in a meaningful way, which I think is something that needs to happen if we're going to address why this continues to happen. I mean, at the end of the day, these people are alien to the landscape. Yes, there's the historical context of the war, the Napoleonic War, but really, I think what draws the animosity and draws the xenophobia out is the way they conduct themselves on this patch of land, which is sacred to this community. And it's all of this is happening in the backdrop of a community in decline as well. So the community, I think, was once like a really sort of populated farming area, but just because of the sheer backbreaking nature of the work, and the way in which the wider Spanish community views rural life, it's pushing people away from that community. It sort of transpires in the film that in one of the few moments you really sort of feel for the residents who are the arbiters of all of this xenophobia is when one of them says, I get up at 5:30 every morning. I'm fucking knackered every day. My work is thankless.
Yeah.
When we go out into towns and cities, people don't like us because we smell.
Yeah.
And this money that we get from the wind farms could actually have been enough for us to do something else, to move away, to work in another profession that is less backbreaking.
Yeah, less lonely as well.
Yeah,
man.
less lonely. And it adds the idea in that even though the couple are refusing to have the wind farms built because, there are ecological ramifications. That's the suggestion, which is something that is very common, a very common complaint about them. There's the energy they produce may be clean, but the way they do it and what happens, it's not as straightforward as that.
There's a lot of noise pollution with them.
Yes.
Apparently, that's the worst thing. I'll talk about this a little bit later on. I've got a little segment which I'm going to continue throughout the rest of the podcasts. It's wind turbine research.
Okay, well, I'm all for it.
Oh, good.
It'll become the staple. It will dwarf everything else.
Yeah. People will listen for the research, which is why I want to leave it to the end.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah.
But no,
Please
you're right. Sorry, it's a bit of a tangent.
No.
There,
I think but obviously the eco warrior couple, as we keep calling them, it's a bit sort of reductive to call them that, but for the sake of brevity in the discussion, they have the wider, broader knowledge to understand why this isn't a good idea.
Yeah, no.
However, the local community don't have that
they want out, don't they?
And they, it's not because they're stupid. It's just because they don't have access to the resources.
Yep.
Or their way of life just sort of restricts them from having the inclination to want to know about things like that. The impact on the natural world.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think people seldom forget when speaking to people about things like this.
Yeah.
That the individuals who live in this part of Spain, their work is hard and it's backbreaking and it's difficult.
Yeah.
And you can understand that desire to escape, to get away. Completely. They're not going to give a shit if the local bird population doesn't sort of nest in a certain area.
Yeah, no.
Because why would they? Because their way of life, they've been conditioned by the difficult nature of their life to think about themselves. And that isn't something that doesn't make them evil.
No.
It's just the circumstances of their existence.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
which the film explores brilliantly, I thought.
Especially in
really turns the perspective a bit, because like you say at the start of the film, you're all with them and you think, but even then there's little crumbs. The way he speaks to his mate, his next door neighbour, who's one of the few people in the community that's nice to him. It's almost like, you need to do this, you need to do that, and it's sort of a bit like, I know more. Which I think is such a reductive attitude if you want to inspire real change. Yeah, completely. Not that I've ever done anything like that, but do you know what I mean? It's
completely. Yeah. I think it all comes to a head in possibly one of the best scenes in the film. Just set in the bar, nighttime, and he buys the two brothers who are the kind of primary instigators of all this turmoil. He buys them a drink, and they just have this really long discussion about why they didn't sign. Such a good scene. Yeah. And there's a moment when he shouts at them, doesn't he? He says, like, these Norwegians who are going to build these wind farms, the only people, they're acting in their own self-interest. I wish you could understand that. They don't care. They're just like, I had an idea that I was going to, like, me and my brother were going to do, like, buy a taxi and start this, like, still relatively simple but developed life elsewhere, and maybe they'll marry, and that is the moment where you kind of really feel for them. And definitely the best scene in the film. In fact, I'd say after that point there's a small, this is something you mentioned after seeing the film, there's a small kind of like steady slight decline in nuance and quality.
So spoilers ahead, major spoilers ahead. It comes to a head and Antoine is murdered by these brothers. I guess they're drunk on a cocktail of frustration about this this life that they dream of being snatched from them by someone they perceive to be uncaring of the attitudes of the local community. They murder him. They strangle him in the woods. Shittest guard dog ever, by the way.
I know,
that guard dog, dreadful.
Just bolts at any
Yeah.
kind of whistle.
Yeah,
It's just like, I'm off, mate.
I'm off, mate. See you later.
Yeah. There's a joke about that earlier in the film where he's like, "Some guard dog you are."
Yeah.
And
I quite like that about it. It's
Yeah.
almost of a slight bit of foreshadowing, comical foreshadowing.
Yeah.
But and obviously that is where your support for the brothers ends, really.
Yeah,
because I mean, if anything, it turns to violence, then it's no matter how legitimate your claims are for that money, and how deserving of empathy you are for your way of life, goes out the window, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the film, the rest of the film is about the wife sort of, because she obviously, before he's murdered, she's like, I want to leave. She has doubts, but then after he dies, it's like she wants to find the body, her husband's body, because she knows it's them that have done it, but there's no way to prove it. And then it's about her etching out this life of quiet resistance against that family and staying there and saying, we're not going to build this, that's it. And she knows the brothers aren't going to touch her because they're not stupid. They're not that stupid. They know that would blow the case wide open for them and they'd be fucked.
Yeah, completely.
So the film, it does, I wouldn't say it dips and then it sort of stays at a level that's not as compelling as the rest of the movie. I think the final act.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it turns into a different film. It becomes a bit more of a sort of straightforward thriller after that. About her trying to kind of prove that it was them that killed her. And there's a bit at the end where, again, big old spoilers, like, there's like an SD card which has the footage, because this guy carries a camera everywhere he goes,
which is a part of the reason why there's so much animosity, isn't there, towards him, because Antoine uses a camera as almost like a defense mechanism to basically say, like, if you keep this going, I'm going to keep filming it all and build like a sort of video dossier that I'm going to give to the police, which will then get you put in prison or whatever. But even it doesn't work for the police, does it? And it's interesting, but carry on anyway.
No, it's weird how that never resolves.
No, you
never get. I always thought there must be a reason, because there's a clear moment right before he gets killed where he kind of hides a camera under some leaves, and I'm just like, okay, that's going to play into the plot, and I really don't know why they didn't. They just sort of wish it away at the end. They're like, I suppose it leads them to the body, doesn't it? Yeah, but that you never. There's no real reason why he had to film any of that, because it means nothing to the context of the plot. I mean, in the interest of realism, it completely works. If an SD card that gets rained on, let me tell you, it's not going to work.
That's true.
Interesting. But there's a family dynamic between mother and daughter that kind of, I guess, takes centre stage towards the end. And there are some really good moments, like the bit where they go and take the rest of the lambs away.
Because the brother's obviously still present, and they see her with her daughter, and her daughter's quite an attractive young lady, they sort of fly around her a little bit, don't they? Get a bit lechy,
a bit menacing.
And I think that generates some of the previous tension, the previous themes, ideas from the film. But I just think the film never really gets back to the level it sort of establishes so well. Before the incident, the murder. But no, I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I think there's a wider, I think it's a film that has like a wider appeal in the sense of understanding, not to sound trite, but other people, and understanding where their frustrations and biases might come from. It might not just be as overt as disliking someone because you're from a different part. It might be they've been manipulated to think so, or maybe they have what they perceive as a genuine reason. I mean, it's easy for me to say that, I guess, but as someone that's never had to really endure it. But I think there's at least a sort of an attempt by the film to try and encourage a deeper, more nuanced understanding of what divides people. And that can be different. Depending on the people involved and the location and the setting of that divide. But I think that the film is clearly sort of channeling some of that energy from the real world divisions, which plague pretty much every country. Especially if you think about Europe. To keep it in Europe, as the film is European, there are many, right? And I think it's really interesting, a really interesting way to approach it. And I think, again, I just liked that the film, the way it handled perspective and the belief systems within each perspective. It didn't necessarily leave anyone with the sunlight shining out of their arse.
No.
But it didn't also demonise them to the point of their point of view being unimportant.
Yeah.
It's the
definitely
people themselves that do that by murdering him that sort of takes away the credibility of their point of view.
Yeah.
Based on a real story.
I did briefly, I didn't know
Yeah.
how real that was, but was it surrounding a murder, was it?
Yeah, surrounding I think the murder in question was a Dutch fella.
Right, okay.
I didn't probably would have helped to read more about it, but he was shot by a brother of which, because there's a brother in the film that has a brain injury. He's still sort of living with a brain injury he has after an altercation with a horse, because they work a lot with horses, don't they?
Yeah.
And at the start of the film, there's that really sort of harrowing sequence of them wrestling with a horse to kill this horse.
I did, yeah.
And that's like, again, about those archaic practices that people still do.
Yeah.
From our perspective, it was horrifying, but for them, it's daily work.
Completely, yeah.
And that's something, when it comes to that kind of violence towards animals, I think a lot of people really struggle to even consider the historical or cultural reasoning for that.
completely.
Which, again, I don't necessarily blame people for, but I wouldn't begrudge you.
It
sets the tone of the film so well about this idea about how you can be so appalled by something that is so important to a community.
Completely, yeah. I was literally going to ask you about that opening scene, because I was initially quite confused by it as to its placement and what it all meant. But that makes complete sense. The idea, I don't know. My taking from it was that he got the brain injury from that specific moment.
Oh, okay.
Because there is a bit where they mentioned that the injury is a result of a horse.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might have been completely
Dangerous animals, horses.
Completely, yeah. But that's a really interesting way to look at it. Actually, the idea that the film opens with something so what we would consider to be so horrific
and barbaric.
Yeah. And yet, like, may at that point in time have been essential to them. Yeah. I've got some stuff here about it. So it's effectively it's about so it's a chap called Martin Verfonden. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So he was killed by his neighbour in 2010, and his widow still lives in their house. So she's got sheep. 69-year-old woman. She's now become like the last inhabitant of the locality. So presumably, through whatever means, the rest of the community is left.
Fucking hell.
So
wow.
And it's again. I think they were more. There's a picture of them next to like a van that looks a lot like what we were saying before about that kind of hippie culture.
Yeah.
So it may be that the attitudes towards them were turned quite hostile based on their lifestyle and how it didn't maybe fit in with the.
I seem to remember there's a disagreement about wood.
Oh really?
I fucking hell, it's a good job this isn't a true crime podcast, isn't it? Because this would be fucking shit. We can barely do a film podcast.
I'm awful at explaining that kind of stuff. Yeah, subscribe to continue reading. Unfortunately, that's where my research ends.
Maybe go and research it yourself.
Yeah.
But because we won't, obviously. No, I think having that element of realism helps the film as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's drawing from a real case, a real case of division. I mean, it might not have been, again, the primary instigator, but I think that fear of the other, the alien, is definitely like a foundational element to any kind of disagreement, I think, if you're in a... and it speaks as well to the nature of... I guess sort of engaging or living amongst another culture as well. Like how I never have done. I'm a real home bird,
Oh man, no, me too.
But it's, that idea of living amongst people that have a very different way of life and different ways of handling things and dealing with things and how they approach you and speak to you and how you speak to them. I just think it's a real fascinating mediation on that. And it's interesting that she stayed there. She's the last person.
Yeah,
the last person in that area is not even native to the area.
Yeah, no, and it's
just sort of fascinating in itself.
Completely. It reminds me, actually, reading about that briefly. Have you heard of this uncontacted tribe called Sentinelese? Have you heard about?
Is that the one, the famous picture of them throwing spears at the helicopter?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So a fair few times, sort of Christian missionaries have gone to the island to try and convert them to Christianity.
Fucking hell!
I mean, you can imagine what happened.
Yeah.
This uncontacted, and the sort of the government of India say patrol the area with the intention of blocking people from going to North Sentinel Island, I think it's called. And it just brought about the idea that some some cultures are better left completely untouched and completely alone to their own devices. Like, apparently they don't even... There's no real evidence that they ever made fire, these people, and they just see the kind of outside world as nothing but invaders. Like, why wouldn't you though, right?
Especially if you're talking about a fucking helicopter.
Yeah,
You haven't got to the stage you've invented fire yet. Or discovered fire, should I say. And there's a helicopter roaring over you. I don't blame them for lobbing spears at it, really.
Absolutely not, no. It's bizarre, but slight segue, but just interesting, just in the sense that sometimes cultures just can't. You just don't clash with them at all. They're unclashable. They'll just kill you.
And also the historical element as well. I mean, if you think about, obviously being European, there's a good chance that you're from a country that at some point controlled land far away from. Far away from where from the motherland, as it were.
Yeah. And
I think that, again, is another fascinating area of how that history plays a huge role in the way that people interact with each other and how they
the attitudes
towards behaviours and cultural norms and
I'm sometimes baffled by how warmly welcomed Britons are to, like, considering our kind of massive colonial background. Why are you being so nice to us? Why, when we go to your airport, is our language all over the airport?
That is true. I do think that's a good point.
Strange, isn't it?
I never thought of that.
You'd think that kind of they want to reclaim a sense of independence, but
and tell us to fuck off.
Which they have every right to do. Anyway, time for wind turbine research.
Yes,
quickly.
Go on. Hit it up. So because there's not a lot of VFX work in this film.
No,
you've got to default to something.
Branch out to wind turbines. I'm fascinated by wind turbines. I think they look. I actually would sign that if I was there. I love the look of them. I don't know why. They sound horrendous. Like, if you go up close to one, it's fucking loud. As there's a scene in the film actually where he does go up to one. This horrible humming.
They are horrible. It sounds hideous.
Apparently, it's a really low frequency noise which is linked to things like depression and stuff. Unconfirmed. Like that's maybe pseudoscience, but I mean, no smoke without fire.
That's true. Yeah, there's a depressed, like, robins flying around. The robins are fucked off.
Overall, using wind to produce energy has fewer effects on the environment than many other energy sources. And they do not require water for cooling either. So there you go. Quickly, VFX talk. I'm sorry about this. This is a bit of a big old tangent. It's not quite as I guess developed as what we were talking about before, but you see some footage from the camera in the film. Looked the camera up. There's an artifact in the footage known as combing, which is when an interlaced video format gets converted to a progressive format. And interlace is like kind of basically blending footage, and you get these weird lines. I don't know if you remember seeing those lines. Unfortunately, the camera in question shoots progressive footage natively, so that was wrong. Shit. 1 out of 5 stars.
Wank. Crap.
Don't go and see it.
Sorogoyen, mate, you're a hack.
Unbelievable.
Dreadful.
You can't.
I don't know what else to say. I'm lost for words.
I thought I'd sort of have.
Should we delete large portions of this episode and just focus on the negative
based on that bombshell?
And his mistreatment of wind turbines.
Anyway,
well, I think that seems like a fitting point to end it there.
I think so.
On that bombshell.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed it.
Excellent. Really implore people to check this film out.
Absolutely, me too. Don't be put off by, if you're maybe not as inclined to watch world cinema, if you maybe enjoy things a little bit more on your home turf, like, don't be put off by the film's, I guess, weighty issues, because it's a tough watch, but it's not like, it is rewarding as well at the same time.
I think whilst the themes of the film are tied deeply into two cultures of which obviously we have no knowledge of or understanding of, or indeed the location, there's a universal nature to the themes about the way that divides exist and how they happen and the apparatus of that divide, and I think that is definitely something you can extrapolate from the film and as we said earlier, dump anywhere in Europe or any part of the world where divide is rife. Yeah,
think so.
and the best films do that, don't they?
Yeah, man, yeah, definitely. I feel like also, if nothing else, watch it for the tension as well. It's not easily generated tension. It's like quite tough.
No, I
to
was
get
quite,
right.
I was quite surprised actually by that. This is a little tidbit before the end, but yeah, my heart rate increase was noticeable.
Yeah,
and I'm an
yeah.
anxious person with a dodgy heart anyway, so my heart rate's I'm always worrying about my heart. But
Oh man,
when watching a film, that's usually when I'm not, and it was noticeable.
yeah, definitely.
Which is something that doesn't happen very often in the cinema anymore.
Hasn't happened to me since Uncut Gems. Actually,
Yes, yeah. That is a fair shout.
yeah,
Yeah,
brilliant,
cool, right.
great.
Questing the cinematic void.
Well, there we go then. Great to bust our world cinema virginity.
Yeah.
I think bizarre that we left it so long. I think.
Yeah, it's like, I assumed we'd done one.
Yeah.
When you said we hadn't, I was like, no, yeah, we have. Oh, no, wait.
No, we
They've
haven't.
all been English language
Ant-Man.
movies. Yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I'm fairly sure that was exclusively in English.
Next week, we're at a crossroads. So we're either going to be doing Mia Hansen Loves One Fine Morning.
Yep.
Big fan of her work, so I'd be really excited to talk about that. Big Lea Seydoux fan as well. She's in it, and apparently excellent.
Is she in The Bourne Identity? No, wait, that's someone else.
No, I don't think she is. She's in. She's James Bond. She's the love interest. Of
Right,
James Bond.
sorry, yeah, I'm with you. Bourne Identity.
Easy mistake.
Yeah.
Similar. So that's the first option.
Yep.
Staying with world cinema. I don't know. I sort of feel energised by that discussion. Not that I haven't felt energised before.
No,
but it's just so much more to mine. I think sometimes.
Yeah.
Which that's at the expense of sounding pompous. It just I don't know. It just sort of is the way. That's the way it is.
Yeah, no, yeah. I feel like, without trying to shit all over blockbusters, if you see too many in a row, they really start to meld together.
Yeah.
And that's
a much better way of saying it.
I just think, it's nice. It's refreshing if you're that way inclined to go and watch something a bit different, a bit difficult.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can kind of find enjoyment in that as well.
Yeah.
There you go.
Agreed. So yeah, One Fine Morning is option A. Option B is Bloxploitation.
Yeah.
Still working out the kinks with that one. Of course, Cinemaster Alfie Martin will be in the house for that.
Absolutely.
So we need to organise the logistics of that. Hopefully, that'll be, if not this week, definitely next week, I would assume.
Yeah. In the coming weeks for sure.
I mean, it couldn't be any more of a severe contrast to One Fine Morning. I'm trying to look at the plot of One Fine Morning, and Bloxploitation is, footy films, footy violence, Rise of the Foot Soldier.
There's no heists. Where are all the heists?
yeah. But yeah, so we'll leave this week on a cliffhanger then, and you'll have to just make do with what we give you.
Ooh.
So,
go
fuck yourselves.
Yeah. No.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
We love you. Please don't go. Have a lovely week, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one.
Cheers.
Bye.